in the linear model, it's all about lead times. Right? Once the car comes back, you need to be very quick in following the steps that leads to selling the assets to a merchant. And here you need to really anticipate on how are you able to reuse the car? How quickly can you make sure you find another customer that will drive the car? And that's a totally different ballgame.
Hello and welcome to the Product as a Service Champion podcast, where we dive into the stories and strategies of leaders reshaping industries with innovative as a service model. I'm Yann Toutant, the CEO of Blackwinch, and today I'm thrilled to have Louis Wyers with us. Louis is the Director of Commerce Partnerships and Digital Retail at Ayvens, a leader in sustainable mobility solutions. Louis, it's great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Jan. Very happy to be on your podcast. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Louis. So let's go directly into Ayvens, who is recognized as a pioneer in rethinking mobility and offering solutions from full service leasing to subscription services. And for those who may not be familiar, can you just give us an overview of what Ayvens does today?
Yeah, I can do that. So Ayvens is born from the recent merger of two companies called LeasePlan, a Dutch company, and ALD Automotive, a French company. We were both active in the leasing and the mobility business. We came together last year to build a champion of sustainability. So our ambition is really to be the leader, the worldwide leader of sustainable mobility in the market. Mm-hmm. We offer services and products to all kinds of customer segments, from corporates, small businesses, also consumers. So we manage a fleet of 3.5 million cars across the world, across 42 countries. So yeah, we're a big player.
Indeed, those are significant figures. And the leasing market concerning automotive has been a huge market. It's about 200 billion euros of annual activity only in Europe. And you're a large player now that you've joined forces in this industry. But also we see that this mature industry is shifting, and is shifting towards a flexible as a service model. So the question is, as a significant player you are, how do you approach this transition, and what is driving the change?
Yeah, that's a pretty wide question, but I'll try to be efficient in my answer. Yeah. So indeed, our core business is mostly what we call operational leasing, long-term leasing. So it's basically financing the cars for customers, taking the residual value risk, but also bundling this, packaging this with a lot of services. So we call this also full service leasing. And it's still a core product. We believe it will still remain for a long time. But it's pretty rigid in some ways. So a customer has to commit to at least 3 to 4 years in order to take this kind of products. Well, in the market, how it develops now, we feel that there's really customer segments requiring more flexibility in the duration of the contracts, in the content of the contracts. And there's also another trend happening at the same time, which is more the circular aspects of leasing. So traditionally, our model is very linear. A customer requests a leasing contract. We purchase a car, and then at the end of the contract, we take back the car and we sell it to used car merchants mainly. But now customers require sometimes a used car approach. And they want to introduce, they have ESG priorities. They want to introduce circularity. So that's also a big change that we're introducing. So if I would have to summarize from a quite strong but rigid and linear model, we're changing all this towards more circularity and more flexibility. But of course, that implies a lot of changes internally to make it happen.
Yeah. I fully understand. And I'm sure in the audience, a lot of people have the benefit of a company car or a lease car, private or via their business. So we understand definitely this idea of a linear model where you're committed to a car during a certain amount of time, which is already an existing and very good service with all the associated services. I used to take this example also when I talk to as a service. You have a stretch like winter tires, tank cars, insurance, roadside assistance. So it's quite a bundle of a solution to keep the driver driving and mobile. But now you're putting in this model circularity and flexibility. So two more components that enter the model and are driving this transformation we talk about. So how will that, if we take, for example, this flexibility aspect, how will that impact the way you deliver your services at Ayvens?
Yeah, so if you take the flexibility on the duration of the contract, for instance, as we our whole business is organized around the physical asset, it creates a lot of extra costs and attention points in our value chain. So basically, when we get back a car, well, we have to transport it, we have to inspect it, we have to make pictures of it. Sometimes we have to refurbish it. So if you pile up everything that needs to happen, if you want to then reoffer it to a customer, then you have quite a significant level of additional costs. Risk is that the car stands still for some time, so that you have a usage rate difficulty. You keep depreciating the car, but it's not in a contract with a customer. So basically, you need to organize this whole transition in a way that lead times are short, that cost levels are low. And to give you maybe a little flavor on the types of challenges we have to tackle, we are able to do all of this already from a long time. We know how to take back cars, how to reoffer them again. But if you want to offer flexibility for a competitive price point to the customers, and if you want to have good margins in the business, you need to keep this whole cost level low and usage rate high. To give you an example, we used to have until recently 12 compounds in the Netherlands where I operate. So the compounds would take back the cars and do a lot of things on them. But we really need an industrial scale in order to bring the cost down. So we're rationalizing our whole logistics setup. In the Netherlands, we're moving towards 3 compounds, much bigger. One of them will be huge, literally. We're building it as we speak. And if you go to this kind of industrial scale, you can keep your levels down. You can get the right providers on the compound in order to smoothen this process and to keep costs as low as possible and keep the pricing competitive to the customer. So scale is really of the essence.
Definitely. When it comes to flexibility, Louis, what are the level of flexibility you will offer? When we talk about flexibility in as a service versus leasing, we often talk about pay-per-use, for example, or opt-in, opt-out. Can you define the flexibility you are now offering?
Yeah, so maybe good to mention, we have already quite a significant level of products live in the market, and we have products of our own under the brand Ayvens, like Ayvens Occasion Lease, and we have Ayvens Free, which is basically a subscription product. We have also products with partners, Kia Flex, to name one. Kia is a big partner of ours. We have Polestar subscription. So basically, we have a lot of initiatives running, and each of these initiatives have, let's say, a little different approach. Most of the time, if I take a Polestar subscription, for instance, you have to commit to 3 months minimum as a customer, and then you can cancel the contract anytime with 1 month's notice. If you take Ayvens Free, it's 6 months. But if you come back to what I was telling earlier, the thing is you need to offer this flexibility to the customer. We're trying to do so with relatively short periods if you compare that to the traditional 3 to 5 years.
Definitely. Yeah.
But you need to try to incentivize the customer to not make use of this flexibility too much. Otherwise, you get these usage rate and cost challenges. But that's approximately the the level of flexibility we offer at this stage. Still exploring, improving, learning a lot, and so I will see if we come to a shorter pay-per-use in term.
Yeah, indeed, and it's very important indeed to incentivize the user to benefit from the flexibility, but also to get incentives to stay as long as possible in the contract to avoid this movement of assets that are cost related. Because basically you're shifting from a single user to a multi-user model, which has the additional cost to the valuation that we just discussed. When it comes to circularity, because we were talking, there are two main components: flexibility. We've been addressing it with the new offers and the associated services. When it comes to circularity, you just touched quickly about potential refurbished car or pre-loved ones, as some people call them. Is it one criteria of circularity to offer refurbished equipment?
So yeah, as leasing as historically applied mostly to new cars, it's really a different thing to offer used cars, and it depends a bit where the customer comes from. If the customer is used to a new car leasing, he or she could expect that a used car comes exactly in the same state as a new car, which is not always the case. Because if you want to refurbish a used car with to be fully back to a new state, then the cost again is too high and you don't have a competitive offer. Of course, the idea with used car leasing is to have it positioned a little bit more competitive, a little bit more aggressive than the same new car. And if it's a customer that is not yet used to new car leasing, but that's maybe used to buy used cars and that is now considering to lease the new car, then the expectations are a bit different. But basically, what we're trying to do is to manage the expectations of the customer and make sure we're transparent on what we're offering. At this stage, we do several levels of refurbishments in what we offer to the customer. So the customers can see online, and we have a full digital experience. They can see in online showrooms which cars do we have available, what is their state, are there some little scratches or not. We zoom into each picture to be transparent, so that the customer can exactly know what he or she can expect.
Yeah, transparency and digital support is very important to validate the quality of the product. And of course, the model you were explaining at the start of the traditional leasing model that is in place for decades, which implies that the car is being sold after the first cycle. Now it's not the case. So after the first cycle, you will keep the ownership of the car and you will provide it to another driver, meaning that you have to manage what you mentioned as the occupancy rate of the asset. And how does this play a role in the new model? I can imagine that there's a strong asset management component to make sure that you don't have cars on the parking that are not being rented out.
Absolutely. So the good thing is that aside of doing long-term leasing, we already had a unit in the company doing short-term rental. So with people and tools already with the necessary skills and capabilities in order to manage this idea of usage rate. But still, it's a deep transformation in our mindset of all the different departments, of our people, of our tools, to make sure we play this game the best way possible. And so it's about skills of people. It's about further developing the tooling. And the critical aspect in that is, again, skill. So the more you have a large pool of cars and all your different products tap into this pool of cars, the more you can manage this occupancy rate. You also need to be very strong at playing the game of what's the outflow of cars. What do you expect in terms of future customer demand, and what are opportunities to keep feeding this pool fleet of cars with good procurement experts. So it's really you have to have a 360 vision of the assets. a lot of business intelligence tooling, market intelligence tooling to know what is the value of the assets if I sell them right now, if I keep them. So yeah, it's really a tricky thing that fortunately we master already quite well, but still a lot to develop, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting shift from this principle of moving from leasing to as a service, because in the traditional leasing, the non-occupancy of the assets is almost not a concern, because there's always an asset associated to a contract, and if the contract is over, this asset is being sold to the second-hand market. Here, you take another risk, which is the risk of having an asset that is not being rented out and having no income from an asset. That's an extra risk on a model that needs to be managed properly. Indeed.
Absolutely. So that's also at more at managerial level and strategic level, something that you need to determine what's your risk appetite on the usage rate. How big do you want this fleet to get versus the long-term lease activities? So that's the trick. And indeed, as you said, in the linear model, it's all about lead times. Once the car comes back, you need to be very quick in following the steps that leads to selling the assets to a merchant. And here you need to really anticipate on how are you able to reuse the car? How quickly can you make sure you find another customer that will drive the car? And that's a totally different ballgame.
Mm-hmm. And when you have those vehicles made available for the customers, but you enter into vehicles that are refurbished, of course, it should come with a higher maintenance cost. So the question is, how do you keep these expenses under control while you keep the quality of the service at the best level for the end user?
That's a good one, Jan, because you need a lot of data on how you think maintenance costs will evolve. And as we're trying in this model to extend assets lifetime, and we don't always have a lot of data as we would like to on what happens if a car becomes 8 or 10 years old and we're still cycling it through this as a service approach. Fortunately, one thing that helps a lot is the transition to electrical cars, which in the Netherlands is quite strong. A big part of our fleet. If you take now our order intake, it's approximately half of our volumes are electrical cars, full electrical cars.
Is it? Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. Yeah.
And on the electrical cars, well, maybe there's one uncertainty more about how do battery evolves, but that seems to play out, let's say, better than the whole industry expected at this stage. But aside of that, an electrical car is much more low maintenance than it used to be on internal combustion engine cars. So that helps to have a good view on what will be the maintenance for electrical cars, and to have a competitive price point also if you go further in the asset lifetime versus internal combustion engines, where probably the maintenance cost will go up if you go beyond the 5 years lifetime. So that helps. But definitely, as along the way, as we build our experience across these models, we're gathering a lot of more data points that we can use in order to model to have a good cost model, a predictive cost model on the future, and to establish the right pricing levels.
Mm-hmm. I'm asking myself, for example, the usage of second-hand parts to repair those cars, which will, of course, also increase the circular aspect of your offer, because you would use second-hand parts. Is this something you consider?
Yes, absolutely. So, and it's also mixing things with the customer expectation aspects that we were talking previously about. If something happens to a car, to a used car, normally, if you need to repair it, the customer doesn't expect it to be repaired exactly at the same norms as it would be with a very new car. So it gives you the opportunity also to tap on a more circular model around the used parts. So definitely we do that. We do that already historically for things like engines, but we're developing this in a lot of different areas. It's still a whole industry moving on to this circular model, so it takes time, but definitely it's part of the evolution of the model. And here also it allows to create a new market by having this used car proposition with a more competitive price point, because in your cost models you will use spare parts instead of new parts.
Do you plan to open up customer segments with used cars that you're not servicing today?
Yeah, so
then create opportunities, create new market and new opportunities for you.
Absolutely. For us, it's both, as I said, an ESG approach from ourselves, but also at request of customers. But it's clearly also a business opportunity, and we see it already with the products I mentioned, occasionally Kia Flex. It's different customers that we manage to approach. If you look at the volumes on the used car market, they're huge, both consumer to consumer, business to consumer. There's a lot of transaction. It's mostly purchasing. Most people that want a used car still purchase a car. But if, just as with new cars, the transition happens to use it as a service for used cars, and there's really a massive opportunities, and it's really double or even triple digit growth coming ahead.
Yeah, and for the clarity of the listeners and also for myself, we are talking about, I think we are mixing here in the discussion B2B and B2C. Are we, or could you position B2B and B2C in the different models that you just explained? Is it like first the car goes to B2B, so to being rented by a business, and then it's coming back and then it's being offered as a second car to a consumer, an individual? Or you also foresee second car for businesses? How do you play the B2B, B2C game in this specific life cycle of the cars?
That's a very good question that our asset management team is asking itself, because they need to have this view on where does the car go in the first cycle, where can it go in the second or in the third cycle. But basically, to tell you how it goes right now, in the first cycle, we're in all the customer segments, from big corporates to small businesses, consumers of all kinds. We do it both directly or through our white label partnerships, and we also have one with Volvo, for instance, or with Tesla. And when the cars come back as used cars and we need to reintroduce them, then also we can offer it to consumers and businesses. At this stage, it's mostly consumers that has driven the growth, but also small businesses are quite interested. And this is really getting up to speed in the small businesses segment. And maybe for corporates, in the second cycle, it's more the ESG logic that triggers them. They have strong ESG commitments, and usually the fleets they manage is a big part of how they see their carbon footprint. So they need to optimize things. A lot of them already did the movement towards electrical vehicles, but now they're also very interested in this movement towards used cars.
Mm-hmm. You know that for electronics in France, there's been a law that came into force about 2 years ago, that any public tender has to include 20% of refurbished devices. So we see the regulation also starting to force organizations, in this case public organizations, to acquire part of their assets as refurbished one. Do you see any regulation also that is going in the same direction for the automotive industry?
Well, we see, as we see it, there are, to put it simple, 3 stakeholders: ourselves as a business, the customers, and the regulators. And maybe a few years back, if you would talk about occasion lease, it was mostly a push model. We were pushing that, but we still had to convince the customers that it's an interesting proposition. More and more, it has become a pull model. So now the customers more and more are the ones requesting us to do more. So, and then, yes, you see the regulation. It's not, the regulator is still mostly in the automotive industry pushing on the powertrain mix. So CO2 performance of new cars. They don't have yet a full regulation on the total lifetime of the assets. But our feeling is that it is in development, and that more and more it will come, and that they also will play a role in pushing things in the
in having regulations that will make it more attractive to go for second-hand than first-hand, or at least to have a mix of first-hand product and second-hand products.
Yeah, at this stage, to take the example of the Netherlands, it's there's subsidies on the used car market, specifically for electrical vehicles. So that wasn't the case a few years ago. So there's interest in keeping the cars in the Netherlands instead of exporting them, and it helps developing this circular approach. And then, depending on the government shifts, it might play out a little bit differently in the coming years. But on the long run, we believe the regulators will probably push also towards a more circular model.
So there are driving forces. The customer asking for it, regulators working in this direction, and the innovators. Indeed. What about the car manufacturers? Why don't they do it themselves?
So I've worked myself quite some time for a car manufacturer, and now I have a lot of partners that are car manufacturers. So that's a subject I like very much, Yann. When you're a car manufacturer, historically, traditionally, your business model is pushing as much as possible outside of what you produce in your plants on the road, and then promoting used car lease might seem like a conflicting interest to promoting new cars. So that's a complex shift. We have lots of discussions with them. We see more and more car manufacturers acknowledging that it's to the benefit of their business model on the long run to also have more interest on occasions from a lot of different perspectives. On the one hand, the more they extend asset lifetime, so the more you keep their assets they produce in the run, the better the residual values, so the value of the car across time. And if you have good residual value development, then also your new cars become more attractive in the way you calculate leasing rates, because it's the residual value versus the new price. So that's one aspect. And then OEMs, so car manufacturers, a big part of their business model is also the loyalty of the customers to the after-sales networks they have, their dealerships. They sell spare parts. So keeping the grip on the customer and keeping the customers in the loop, developing these occasions in the proper way, extending product lifetime also allows to sell more and more spare parts, especially if you do it well in, I don't want to get too technical, but in captive construction. For instance, what we do with Ford or with Mazda, we have Ford leasing. So the customer can take Ford leasing, and then he's supposed to go back to the Ford dealer every time to maintain or repair the cars or take care of the tires. So it keeps, for the OEM, it's interesting because the customers remain in their value chain, bringing after sales, also allowing the dealers to keep a good business model with occasions and with after sales turnover in the workshops. So it's a bit sometimes a bit short-term versus long-term conflict of interest for the OEMs, but they're really moving, most of them lately.
I really appreciate what you mentioned about the quality of the car being designed, or the car being designed to have the best quality and to stay on the road as long as possible. So promoting this possibility of having this car as a second-hand car, which will benefit from the lease price or the rental price for the first usage of the car, because it will have a higher residual value thanks to the quality of the car. That's a very interesting double effect of producing a car so it can last long, which will make it obviously interesting for a rental model as from day one.
And it's a kind of a paradox, because by working on the occasions and the long term, you think it will not help the sale of used cars, but in the end it does. So it's it's an interesting idea.
Interesting to connect those two dots, indeed. Louis, in terms of marketing, from your experience, when it comes to pushing this new model, more flexible, is there any big shift in terms of marketing? Is there any new channels that you use to address the target audience? How do you make sure that the message does not conflict with the original business model? Can you guide us on this aspect?
That's a good one, because it's still a market in development. If you say private lease in the Netherlands, everyone knows about it. But if you talk about flexible products, subscription, then they don't always know it. So it requires a little bit different approach in the marketing. There's also the risk of confusing the customers, because they want a car, they want to lease a car, and then you offer different products, one which is long term, the other one which is subscription. So you really need to, I believe, rationalize it, try to keep it simple, have the USPs quite clearly stated in the digital journey or in the customer journey. We have different acquisition channels. A big part is online. We have partners also with the AMWB, which is a big a roadside assistance association, a very big brand for consumers in the Netherlands. So they help us acquire a lot of occasion lease contracts. We have our own online channels, and we have our partnerships with OEMs. So if you go to the Mazda dealer, then you also get offered these kind of products. You can get, if you like a used car in the showroom, the Mazda dealer can immediately tell you, okay, if you want it for 1 year or 3 years, then this is the rate we're talking about. So we're leaning on, to summarize, we're leaning on our existing acquisition channels, but it requires a little bit more communication and to keep things simple.
Keeping things simple, it's always a challenge in the as-a-service industry, especially for the person that has to sell those models.
Absolutely.
Of course, I love our discussion, and we want to keep it short and simple also for our audience. So we will start to think about concluding. But before we enter into conclusion, I have let's say 2 last questions for you, Louis. The first one is a challenge that we often see in the industry is how to communicate the ESG benefits of a solution, of a as-a-service solution versus a traditional purchase or leasing solution. So you mentioned that Ayvens has the world's largest multi-brand electric vehicle fleet, and you're committed to a net zero goals. But we also talked about the second-hand parts that will be included into the model. We talked about second-hand car leasing or second car rental or as a service. So there's a lot of ESG benefits for the end user. And the question is, how do you quantify them? How do you communicate? How you help your customers to reduce their carbon footprint with your model, and how you quantify it?
I'll be very honest with you, Jan. That's still a struggle to know precisely how we need to do that. We have some egregious already on the table. We're doing things, but how to put this into the right structure and the right plans, it's in development. There's from the perspective of our customers, of our corporate customers, there's the European regulation that makes that they have to produce big reports on ESG. There we communicate, we provide all the reports to show what's the performance of their fleet, and here we integrate electrification, and we try to include also these elements of circularity, which contribute in the end to the sustainability of their model. If you talk about customers, then it's a different ball game. And some customers, through the way they do their purchasing choices, they don't want to produce a new car. They don't want that if they order a car, it requires energy resources to get things out of the ground and produce a car in the plant. So they like the idea of okay, I'm purchasing something that already exists that maybe needs some little refurbishment. But yeah, how to integrate all these perspectives and the regulators, the customer, the corporate customers, the customers, we're still continuously thinking about that. And maybe one time you can give me some tips on what you see in other industries.
Indeed. Well, unfortunately, I have often the same answer. It's a work in progress. And we are facing the need of definition of KPIs, standard KPIs, to demonstrate the circularity of an as-a-service model and the CO2 impact. There are some initiatives that we see from one country to another, but there is no standard KPI on this matter. So it is unfortunately a work in progress for a lot of organizations. We also want to avoid greenwashing. So it's a very sensitive topic that needs to be addressed seriously and to be standardized. So it's a call for action for the audience. There is any organization that wants to step in and to create this standard, there is a market. Great. Leading to our conclusion, Louis, I love to ask this question. If we were able to have a time machine, the car of Back to the Future, but we would go back in time 5 years ago, you would meet Louis in 2018. What would be your advice to him according to all the journey you've done into as a service those last 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think if I look back at myself, I was already in 2018 a big believer in this, but sometimes with the possibility to get discouraged about how big this change is in the minds, in the business models. So I would give my old self, my young self, the advice to just keep going, believing in it, because eventually this is the sense of history. This is the way we're going to build a society with the right level of sustainability. It's needed for our planet. I think we can combine in these kind of transitions really the benefits of sustainability and of keeping the business going. So yeah, I would tell myself 5 years ago to put it even higher on the agenda, this transition to as a service, than what I did already.
Yeah, it's obvious that for the people who have this vision like you have, that it's a new way forward, and it's also creating new business models that also have their profitability components. And it's not against the existing ones, but it's more a connection of profitability and sustainability that can synergize and create new business models. And I think this is exactly what you have demonstrated to us during this podcast. For our listeners, if you want to know more about Ayvens, you can of course connect to the website, and we will put the credentials in the comments of the podcast. Louis, thank you very much for your time today. I'm very happy of the discussion we had, and able to share your vision in only 40 minutes, which is quite dense because there's so much to say about it. Very appreciate that you've been able to nail it down to this discussion. So thank you very much for your insights today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure discussing this with Yann. So thank you very much. Also, hope the listeners enjoyed.
I'm sure. And for the listeners, for everyone tuning into the podcast as a service champions, if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe and join us next time as we continue exploring how as a service models are shaping our world. Thank you, everyone.